Today we're going to do things a little bit differently again. We're actually going to start our look at a research paper in a way that most people will have actually seen a piece of research, or at least it's where they're going to have come into contact to a reference to a paper, to the findings of the paper, or some quotations from a paper. And that's going to be as a press release. It's going to be in the form of an online news article for a news outlet, or it's going to be on a commercial website for people that are interested in the topic, or they're going to find it on social media. Now, that's actually how most trainers and coaches are actually going to come into contact with the research papers. And that's a great thing to have this sharing of information, and almost instantaneous sharing of information can be a great thing. But it can also be a tremendous problem. And we're going to go through that problem and exemplify it with this paper that we're going to talk about today. So let's get started and just look at one of the newest exercise science headlines that's been making its rounds for a few weeks on the internet. And I'm going to read the headline specifically. This is one of the most common ones. There's lots of variants out there, but this is the headline that caught my eye. Lighter weights just as effective as heavier weights to gain muscle, build strength. Now, this headline got posted and reposted in numerous variations on social media and news outlets everywhere, a huge number of times and shares. And this was especially a popular article among individuals who were opponents of lifting heavy weights. They don't like to prescribe heavy weights. They think that you can get the same results with light weights, or lifting heavy weights is totally unnecessary for fitness. Now, the headline generally was attached to a quote from the press release that was done, an interview that was done with the lead investigator. It's not actually out of the paper, but this quote is, once again, was interpreted to be the point of the article is, lift to the point of exhaustion, and it doesn't matter whether the weights are heavy or light. Now, that's a pretty strong statement that pretty much contradicts tons of information that we have from experience and the scientific literature. But it's a headline. It's a headline and it's a media quote. It's not actually a summary of what the paper actually says. The magazine article authors, or the interview author, or the Facebook authors, not the scientists, may not be truly representing the facts in a way that can be supported by the paper. Okay? And this points out a problem that we need to circumvent, is that the authors of those interview papers and those highlighting papers didn't actually read the research paper. They only read the university press release. It's really hard for us to make a good assumption, or not a good assumption, an interpretation of a research paper if we only read press releases about it. So let's actually go look at the paper that was featured on the AAAS's Eureka Alert website, Men's Health website, Science Daily website, Huffington Post, New York Times, Men's Fitness, Bodybuilding.com, Muscle and Fitness, Reddit, Shape, Business Insider, and bunches more. It got tons and tons of mileage. Now, there are some issues that we need to talk about when we read this particular paper. The first issue, the first major issue, is that the paper said it was a comparison of low repetitions to high repetitions. Now this brings to mind that we're going to be comparing singles, doubles, triples, maybe fives, low repetitions, to maybe 10s and 12s, high repetitions. Okay? But that's not actually what this paper is about. That's not the rep schemes that were actually investigated. What they investigated were 8 to 12 repetitions being considered to be low repetitions, and they compared that to 20 to 25 repetitions, which they considered high repetitions. So if we put this in the context of a real-world gym, the paper actually only looked at high repetitions versus higher repetitions. And they also didn't look at set schemes that were intended to actually build strength. They looked at a basically hypertrophy bias programming organization. Basically, they were doing sets to failure. So, based on the context, 8 to 12 repetitions versus 20 to 25 repetitions, this paper basically is not about what the media is purporting it to be about. It's not about high versus low repetitions. And in fact, we can't make any inferences about that from the paper as written. Now, if there was really a lack of relationship or an absence of a load strength relationship or a volume intensity relationship, and all I needed to do was to use any weight and just do it until exhaustion, that means that I should be able to take the bar here, an unloaded bar, 20 kilos or 45 pounds, and bench press it until I can't do another repetition. And then that will make me absolutely as strong and as massive as if I did 275 pounds or 125 kilos for a single, and then I failed on the second. Because that's the mentality or the approach that the research were taking. And I'll let that sink in for a second and let you think about, can that really occur in the real world? So we have a sort of a disconnect in principle that they're espousing and what actually occurs in the real world. Now, the second relatively glossed over issue in the paper is that they used 3 machine-based exercises as part of the protocol and 1 free weight exercise. They used the leg press, the leg extension, and a shoulder press as the machine exercises, and then they used a standard free weight bench press, barbell bench press, as the tests of whether this was going to work or not, whether the organization was going to work or not. So they had a pre-test and a post-test. Now, interestingly, the 3 machine-based tests had very similar results between the 8 to 12 repetition group and the 20 to 25 repetition group in terms of outcomes, strength and hypertrophy, strength and mass. So it's easy to see where they got this concept that they're the same. But when they actually did barbell training, what they found out, and it's in the paper, but it's actually not brought out very strongly, is that the barbell bench press, 8 to 12 repetitions, made the subject stronger than doing 20 to 25 repetitions. Now, that makes sense to most of us who think about how a machine versus free weight works, motor control and the magnitude of stimulus. So when we think of this particular finding, again, based on this methods of their methods of experimentation, what we see is we can't really make a strong statement based on their findings, again, because we have contradictory findings based on machine versus free weights. Okay, we're going on to some additional issues that we find in the paper. And the third issue is that they gave each group, right after training sessions, a protein supplement. Now, is this actually a training study where we're looking at the effects of weight training on the physiology of the human body, and we're trying to define whether we can get it stronger by manipulating repetitions and weights? Or is this a nutritional supplementation study? Because we are mixing our metaphors, mixing our methods here, and the methods that they use may have masked or artificially or artifactually changed the results or the outcomes. So the biochemical data that was derived from this study may not be useful because it may have been artifactually influenced away from the original hypothesis based on supplementation. The fourth issue is that the subject's performance levels was a bit misunderstood by the researchers. They were capable of bench pressing about 98 kilos, about 216 pounds. And this was as the result of 4 years of consistent training of between 3 and 6 times per week, about 4.5 times per week of training for 4 years. Now, that sounds somewhat impressive, but if you look at, given the individuals, the subject's body weights and their 98 kilos of bench press, that puts them somewhere in the late beginners or intermediate, or just making the transition to the intermediate stage of training. Now, all in all, that's just okay. But if you think about what was actually seen here in terms of strength gain, is that on average they bench pressed 11 kilos more after 12 weeks of training. So they had a very quick ramp up in strength ability in a very short period of time. That's indicative of a beginner's level of training or of progression. So beginners adapt quickly, and they will adapt to almost any training organization, meaning you can have them do push-ups and they'll increase their bench press. So the data that we see here can't really tell us a proper answer to which is better, high repetitions or super high repetitions, and have that apply to any kind of group other than those that are included as part of this study. If you actually, or beginners, if you actually do some calculations here, think about this. If they are increasing 11 kilos every 12 weeks, roughly, that's going to give you somewhere around 44 to 52 kilos of improvement each year. So let's do some back calculation of progression gain and sort of do a regression down to where they started with. Less than 2 years before the beginning of this study, these people couldn't bench press the bar. But they've been training for 4 years. So we have some issues with their previous training and incomplete description of this subject population. One of the other aspects here in regards to the subjects is that they were actually required to have trained using a split exercise routine. Essentially, some of the biased bodybuilding type general fitness routines that might not generate appropriate results. All right, so there are a bunch of other issues that we could discuss, but let's just focus on those four, just leave it with those four, and think about this in terms of what we can infer from the paper based on these limitations. Well, we need to first be aware that we can't really make any inferences or generalizations to other populations other than to the subjects that were included in this paper in groups that are exactly like them. And that's not going to be describing elite athletes, intermediate athletes, beginning athletes. It's not going to be describing elite trainees, advanced trainees, intermediate trainees, or untrained individuals. It's not going to be a very useful set of data for us. The good thing is that higher repetitions, 8 to 12, and 20 to 25 repetitions, both induced an increase in muscle mass. The individuals in this particular study gained about 0.8 kilograms in lean body mass. That's about 1 3/4 pound over the 12 weeks. That's really pretty good. Adding lean body mass is one of our goals. That's what we want to do with training. But, there's a big but. Remember that they did immediately post-workout protein supplementation? Well, would that increase in lean body mass, would it have been induced by strength training alone, or was the protein supplementation required to drive that training? The paper can't make that determination. And once again, are we doing a nutritional study or are we doing a training study? Okay, so what we see here is an interesting paper. It is an interesting paper, but in its current form, the data can't really tell us how to train anyone. And that's what the intent of the paper was to give us some guidance on how to train individuals. So which is better to use for strength gain? High reps or higher repetitions? Which is going to be better for hypertrophy gains? High repetitions or higher repetitions? Well, it really can't tell us much about that, but it can tell us something, and this is going to be counter to what most people are going to be putting in their blogs and counter to what the researchers probably intended. The way I interpret this data, the way I look at it, is that we have 8 to 12 repetitions and 20 to 25 repetitions producing arguably the same outcomes. Now, if we go back to about the 1980s, Costel did some work with swimmers where he cut the volume of training and got an improved performance. Less time in the pool, better performance. Well, here we're not seeing less time in the weight room and better performance. We're seeing that if we cut the volume in half down to 8s and 12s, that we can, guess what? Get the exact same results as we spent with this longer period of time in the gyms. Think about it. If we're doing 20 to 25 repetitions for multiple sets on multiple exercises and spend a couple hours in the gym, or we do 8 to 12 repetitions, multiple exercises in the gym, we cut the time down 40, 50%. Which is more bang for the buck? for the exact same outcome? Well, doing half the work and getting the exact same outcome means that clients that are time harried, that need less time or have less time to spend in the gym, can benefit from this. Also, if you as a trainer don't want to spend hours and hours with a trainee, you can, or you want to get a higher traffic rate or traffic of clients through your supervision, then you're going to use the biggest bang for the bucks with the lowest repetition scheme for your business. So you might be able to come up with something that's useful out of this paper, but that's a stretch because the data is not that strong. So the bottom line here is that the trainer needs to read the original research. And if we go back to the original press release that all this was steamrolled from, the original paper's link was right there in that article, right in that press release. All you had to do is click on it and go to the original paper and read it. You can read it in detail and then put it in the context of your particular type of training, your knowledge base, your experience base, and if the data is strong enough, then you can put it in practice with your specific clients if it's warranted, if it's needed. But the biggest take-home point out of this little scrawl of time here is don't rely on headlines and snippets of information and incomplete data that you see on social media to inform you on how to train your clients or train yourself.